Care is not something that arises naturally just because we are connected to someone, nor is it something that simply grows out of pleasant feelings. Many people confuse caring with liking, attachment with enjoyment. We say we care for someone, but when we look closely, we realize what we cherish in them is often the loveliness they reserve for us, their gentleness, their attentiveness, their humility, or the sense of being respected when we are with them. When those things remain, we feel we care. When they disappear, our care wavers. That shows that we are not always caring for the person. Often, we are caring for the feeling we receive when we are beside that person. In family life, or among blood relatives, this is not uncommon either. Some relationships exist not because of care, but because of obligation. We care because we must, because of responsibility, moral duty, or fear of being judged. But when our personal interests are hit too often, when the feeling of giving exceeds what we can bear, we easily close our hearts. At that point, the word kin no longer automatically goes with the word care. Kinship only seems to matter when it still brings us some benefit, if only a certain respect from others, or the reputation of being a good person. The truth is that most people care according to the principle of reciprocity. If someone cares for us, we can more easily care back. If someone is indifferent to us, it is very hard to open our hearts. That is not necessarily wrong. It is a form of self-protection. We fear giving without being received, sacrificing without being appreciated, loving and ending up the one who loses. And so our care is often attached to conditions, even when we do not notice it ourselves. We care when we feel safe, when we feel we will not lose too much. Only in ideal images, such as a parent's love for a child, or the compassion of those who have gone beyond a very large ego, do we see a kind of care that does not demand anything in return. But even that, in real life, is not always complete. Some parents cannot keep loving when their children do not meet expectations. Some people do great charity in public, yet turn away from a small suffering right in front of them. This shows that love may be a seed already present in humans, but for it to become true care, we must train for a long time, steadily and persistently, to move beyond selfishness and fear within ourselves. True care, when seen deeply, always begins with giving. Giving is not doing a lot, speaking beautifully, or sacrificing until we collapse just to be recognized. Giving is offering with a single purpose, that the other person may be more at peace. When we give while still hoping others will see it, hoping to be acknowledged, hoping to be repaid, then our giving has been mixed. It is no longer pure giving. It becomes a kind of emotional investment. We give not because they need it, but because we want to be loved more. Giving demands a great honesty toward ourselves. Each time we offer something, we must dare to look directly at our motive. Are we giving for them or for our own feeling? Are we helping because their suffering lessens or because we want to see ourselves as a good person? Not everyone is able to care without needing care in return, but that does not mean we must attach conditions to every act of giving. Once care is tied to conditions, it easily turns into a burden for both sides. In fact, being able to care for someone else is already a kind of happiness. In this life, many people want to care but do not know whom to care for or have no one to care for. Some live among many people, yet their hearts are dry and no longer capable of being moved. Some carry too many wounds and no longer dare to open up. So when we still have someone to care for, still have a place for our hearts to turn toward, that is already a great blessing. If we keep demanding that the other person respond exactly as we wish, we unintentionally make that care heavy and fragile. To care in the right way is to care so that the other person truly receives it, while we ourselves are not dragged into painful entanglement. This is a very subtle balance. We do not sacrifice to the point of losing ourselves, but we also don't hold back to the point of impoverishing the other. When care reaches that balance, it keeps its original beauty, light, warm, and enduring. Alongside giving, care contains another essential substance: sharing. Giving brings joy, then sharing helps carry away sorrow. Everyone has times of weakness, of stumbling, of being trapped in circumstances beyond their capacity. In those moments, what people need most is not always a solution, but presence, knowing that someone is there. Listening, holding a portion of the weight in their heart is enough to make suffering less sharp. We cannot always pull the person we care for out of pain, but a timely presence, a compassionate gaze, a quiet space to listen can help them feel less alone. When pain is held by two hearts, it can no longer keep its original weight. That is why human beings need each other, not only for joy, but also to cross the dark stretches together. On the other hand, living beside someone who always says, "I care," yet is absent in difficult times, is a deeply cold experience. When we need to be heard, but receive only avoidance, when we need one gentle question, but receive only busy excuses, the original difficulty becomes a deeper suffering, not because the problem is too big, but because we feel we are not being accompanied. We do not demand that they fix things for us. We only hope they will carry a portion of the heaviness in our heart. Care cannot exist without understanding. Care without understanding easily becomes a formality, even an imposition. To understand, we must learn to listen. Listening is not to argue, not to correct immediately, but to recognize where the other person is, what they are stuck in, what they need from us in that moment. Some requests may sound unreasonable, but behind them is fear, a wound, or an unnamed sense of insecurity. Listening requires a great deal of energy. We must be steady enough to receive heavy emotions, tearful stories, even anger and resentment. That is not easy. Therefore, true care needs not only kindness, but also understanding and clear awareness. To care is to think for the other. To understand is to know how to think in the right way. When we truly care for each other, we do not wait for a cry for help before we pay attention. We notice small changes, fatigue in the eyes, an unusual silence, a slow gesture. Care does not lie in grand acts, but in everyday details. A meal that fits their taste, a hand ready to help, a silence that comes at the right time, an attitude that doesn't abandon them when they feel lost or confused. In the end, care is present only when it contains two essential elements, giving and sharing. Without giving, care becomes calculating. Without sharing, care becomes superficial. When we understand that the suffering of the person we care for is also a part of our suffering, we no longer ask who will help, because we know, if not us, then who? Following that line of reflection, we see that care, when nurtured properly, is not only a bond between two people, it's a way of living. It shapes how we view the world, how we face hardship, and how we are present in ordinary moments. A person capable of deep care usually lives not in haste. They do not rush to conclude, do not judge easily, and do not withdraw quickly when something displeases them, because within them a different habit has formed, the habit of pausing in order to understand.
When we are not used to pausing, we react. The other is sad, we rush to fix. The other is angry, we rush to defend. The other is silent, we rush to interpret. Such reactions are not always bad, but they often come from our own anxieties, fear of being wrong, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being good enough. And so, instead of truly being with the other person's feelings, we try to quickly return everything to the state of fine. Yet sometimes what people need is not fine, but permission to stay with what is not fine, with someone sitting beside them without forcing anything. True care allows others to be weak. It does not require them to be strong, positive, or to overcome immediately. It gives them the right to be tired, to be sad, to slow down. This is very different from a kind of emotion that disguises itself as love, yet carries pressure. We say we care, but we cannot tolerate the other person being sad for long. We say we are concerned, but we become impatient when they are not better yet. In truth, that impatience is not because they suffer too long, but because we cannot bear our own sense of helplessness. To care, in the deeper sense, is to accept that we cannot control another person's journey. We cannot live for them, hurt for them, or learn for them. We can only walk beside them when they allow it. This demands great humility. Our ego often wants to be the rescuer, the one with answers, the one who makes everything better. But care does not need heroes, it needs sincere presence. In daily life, many misunderstandings arise not because feelings are lacking, but because true listening is lacking. We hear with our ears, but our mind has already prepared a reply. We look with our eyes, but our heart has already judged. We listen to react, not to understand. When the other person shares sadness, we immediately compare it to our own sadness. When they speak of difficulty, we rush to offer advice. Those things may come from goodwill, but they can unintentionally close the door to sharing. Real listening means allowing the other person's story to exist fully without being interrupted by our experience or viewpoint. This is a difficult practice because it requires us to set the ego aside for a moment. But when we do, the other person feels it clearly. They are respected, seen, recognized, and that feeling is often the deepest kind of healing. Care is not always gentle. Sometimes caring means daring to say what is hard to say, daring to set boundaries, daring to refuse what harms both sides. Many people fear making others sad, so they choose silence and endurance. But endurance that lasts too long without being understood or shared becomes resentment. Resentment left unspoken dries the heart, and when the heart becomes dry, we no longer have the same capacity to care. So caring is not only giving, it is also honesty. Honesty with our feelings, honesty with our limits, honesty about what we can and cannot do. Care without honesty easily becomes blind sacrifice, and blind sacrifice, though it may look noble at first, will eventually exhaust both sides. Another crucial point is that care does not choose convenient times. It's easy to care when everything is calm, when the other person is happy and pleasant. But real care is revealed most clearly when circumstances become difficult, when the other person is no longer lovely, when they are irritable, withdrawn, disappointed, or even hurt us. We do not always have the strength to care in those moments, but at least we can ask, what is happening inside them? What pain is driving them to act this way? That question is not meant to excuse wrong behavior. It is meant to keep us from closing our hearts too quickly. When we understand that behind a difficult behavior, there is often an unnamed pain, we take things less personally. We no longer see ourselves as the only victim. We see another human being who is also struggling in their suffering. Care, therefore, does not make us weak, as many people fear. On the contrary, it requires great inner strength. Strength not to react immediately, strength not to withdraw too fast, strength to stay with discomfort without losing kindness. People with that strength are often not loud, not showy, but deeply steady. When we practice giving and sharing long enough, care gradually becomes natural. We no longer have to strain to care correctly. We begin to know intuitively what to do and what to stop. We become more sensitive to others' needs, yet we do not neglect our own. We give with awareness, so we do not feel we are losing, and because we do not feel loss, we do not demand compensation. At a deeper level, care is also the ability to accompany someone through the transforming stages of life. There are times when people do not need advice or solutions. They only need someone patient enough not to leave. That patience is not passive waiting, but a soft commitment. I am here when you need. In a world where everything moves fast, that kind of staying becomes a rare gift. And when care ripens, we realize something strange and beautiful. Caring for others is also caring for ourselves. When we learn to tend to another's suffering with understanding, we also learn to tend to our own. When we listen to others without judgment, we judge ourselves less. When we allow others to be imperfect, we allow ourselves to be human. At that point, care is no longer a burden or an obligation. It becomes a flow. We do not have to strain to be good, nor to prove anything. We simply live with a heart open enough, aware enough, and gentle enough. In that flow, joy arrives naturally, and sorrow is welcomed naturally. Nothing is pushed away, and nothing is clung to. Perhaps that is why when care reaches depth, it always brings a sense of ease. Not ease because there is no suffering, but ease because we no longer fight suffering. We understand that life contains both joy and sorrow, and that care is the ability to go through both together without losing each other and without losing ourselves. Seen this way, care is not distant or lofty. It lives in small, ordinary actions done with an understanding heart. When one heart understands another, every gesture becomes alive, and then care no longer needs to be named because it naturally appears in how we live, how we look, and how we stay beside one another each day. Going further still, we recognize that care is not only how we treat a few close people, it is how we relate to life itself. A person who learns to care well gradually changes their rhythm. They no longer live in constant defense, no longer view others as threats or competitors. They step out of the habit of measuring gain and loss in every relationship, and that loosening makes the inner life wider. Much human suffering does not come from a lack of care, but from care mixed with too many conditions. We care when we are repaid. We care when it benefits us. We care when we feel safe. When those conditions disappear, care retreats. This keeps people living with a quiet anxiety, fear of no longer being worthy of care, fear of being abandoned if they no longer offer some value. True care, as the spirit of this reflection suggests, does not deny human selfishness, but it does not indulge it. It looks directly at the truth that we are not yet wide enough to care without conditions, yet we patiently train to become a little less conditional each day. No one begins with vast care. Even those known for compassion have passed through many stages of observing, stumbling, adjusting. Care is a capacity that is nurtured, not a fixed trait. In daily life, this is especially visible. We often say we care for parents, children, siblings, but if we look closely, much familial care is mixed with expectations, duties, and control. We care for our children, but want them to live our way. We care for our parents, but want them to understand and support every choice we make. When those expectations are not met, care quickly turns into disappointment, sulking, or distance. At that point, we often comfort ourselves by saying, "I've cared enough," when in fact we have cared in the way we want, not necessarily in the way the other person needs. Care, in its deeper sense, requires a difficult skill, taking ourselves out of the center. Not denying ourselves, but not treating our feelings and needs as the only measure of everything. When the other person behaves differently than what we expect, instead of concluding they are ungrateful or inconsiderate, we try to ask, what context are they living in? What pressures are affecting them? What limits prevent them from responding? These questions do not diminish our value. They allow us to see the relationship through a wider lens. One of the greatest tests of care is when it is not recognized. We give, we share, we show up, yet the other person may not see it, may not understand, or treat it as obvious. Then something very human arises in us, hurt. We ask, what am I doing this for? If we are not aware enough, we begin to withdraw, or we keep giving with bitterness. But if we look deeper, that question reveals our original motive. Did we give because we truly wanted them at peace, or because we wanted recognition? This does not mean we must accept being neglected or exploited. Care is not the same as erasing boundaries. On the contrary, true care always goes with self-respect. When we give and no longer feel joy or willingness, that is a sign to stop and look again. Stopping is not the end of care, it is a correction of how we care. Sometimes caring means continuing to give, but sometimes caring means stepping back so we don't injure both sides.
When it comes to sharing suffering, many people think first of big actions, giving money, doing tasks, solving problems, but the deepest sharing happens emotionally. It is when we are calm enough to sit beside another's pain without panic. Not everyone can do this because another's pain often triggers our own unresolved pain. We see them sad and remember our own sadness. We see them powerless and touch our own powerlessness. If we have never learned to stay with our own feelings, it is very hard to stay with someone else's. So learning to care for others is also learning to return to ourselves. We must learn to recognize feelings, accept them, and not rush to drive them away. When we are no longer afraid of our own sadness, we fear others' sadness less. When we no longer treat vulnerability as shameful, we stop forcing others to be strong. Then sharing becomes more natural, more gentle. A beautiful point in the spirit of this writing is that it does not separate care from everyday life. Care is not in grand vows, but in small gestures. A meal cooked with attention, a question asked at the right moment, a silence offered when silence is needed, a hand ready to help without being asked. These things, though small, accumulate into a deep sense of safety in a relationship. The cared-for person feels they're not alone, that their existence matters to someone. When care is present long enough, it forms a nourishing circle. The cared-for person gains energy to live, to overcome hardship, and then they too can care for others more easily. When care is cut off, people become guarded, suspicious, defensive. They do not necessarily become worse, they are simply trying to protect themselves in a world that no longer feels safe. In the end, care is not something to possess, but something to practice. Each day, in every relationship, we have choices to understand or not, to give or to withhold, to share or to turn away. We will not always choose well, but each time we realize we have closed off, we also have a chance to open a little, and even that little is enough for the current of care to continue. Perhaps the most important thing care teaches is humility. When we care, we learn that we are not above anyone. We too are fragile, full of flaws, in need of being understood and held. When we see this clearly, we stop standing in judgment and begin standing in companionship. And from that place, life becomes much lighter. Vast, loving care, as suggested by the closing spirit, is not a faraway ideal. It begins with very small actions done with a mindful heart. When we remember that the other person's joy is also our joy and that their suffering also touches us, we naturally slow down, go deeper, become kinder, and in that kindness, both we and the other are gently led toward a place of greater ease within this very life. When we contemplate more deeply, we see that care is not a fixed state, but a flow. Sometimes it is abundant, sometimes it runs dry. Sometimes we can care easily, and sometimes a small collision is enough to make us shut down. What matters is not whether we can always care, but whether we are honest enough to recognize when we are no longer caring. Because much hurt in relationships comes from continuing to act in the name of care, while inside we are tired, irritated, and storing resentment. When care is forced, it slowly deforms. We give no longer with joy, but with duty. We share no longer willingly, but by enduring. And prolonged endurance breeds bitterness. Bitterness is dangerous because it makes us give while silently blaming. On the outside, we may look devoted. On the inside, the heart is drying out. The receiver, without words, can still feel that heaviness. Care that has lost its clarity can no longer nourish. That is why learning to care also means learning to pause and ask, from where am I giving? From fullness or from lack? From joy or from fear of being abandoned? Pausing is not to retreat entirely, but to renew our intention. Sometimes the best way to care is to return to ourselves for a while, to restore, so we do not keep giving while depleted. A depleted person cannot support anyone for long, no matter how sincere they are. In marriage or long-term love, this becomes even clearer. At first, care often comes with enthusiasm. We do much, sacrifice much, because feelings are fresh and full. But as life pressure increases and differences show themselves, if we do not replenish the source of care inside, we fall into doing things to get through. We still do the old tasks, but without presence.
and when presence is missing, care becomes mere form. Presence is a crucial substance of care. Presence is not only being physically there, but being there with the heart. When we are beside someone, when our mind is elsewhere, they feel they are not truly seen. We may cook for them, work for them, but inside we carry irritation, worries, or demands. Those actions may not touch deeply. True care needs real presence, even if only in brief moments. There is a subtle truth many people miss. Care does not always feel pleasant. Sometimes caring means facing what is hard to say and hard to hear. Caring for someone going the wrong way is not pretending not to see. It is having the courage to speak the truth with kindness and respect. But to do that, we need deep understanding. Without understanding, our words become judgment. Without enough care, our bluntness becomes harm. Understanding here is not only understanding the other person, but understanding ourselves. Am I speaking because I want them to grow, or because I want to discharge my discomfort? Am I offering feedback as a companion, or from above? When we are not clear with ourselves, we easily use care to justify control. And control, even dressed in good intentions, is still a subtle kind of violence. In modern society, where people are increasingly busy and isolated, care becomes even rarer. We can connect with many through technology, yet lack deep connection. We know many facts about each other, yet do not truly understand each other. We can care with a quick message or an emoji, but lack the time and energy to sit down and listen. Gradually, we get used to a kind of care that is fast and light, but also shallow. This does not mean those small gestures are worthless, but if we stop there, care cannot deepen. Depth requires time. It requires slowing down. It requires giving up some convenience so we can truly be there for another. In a world that pushes us to be faster, more productive, more efficient, choosing to slow down in order to care becomes an act of courage. When we truly care for someone, we begin to notice the smallest things. We hear a shift in their voice. We see a change in their eyes. We sense their fatigue before they speak. This sensitivity is not guesswork. It is the fruit of sustained attention. It shows we have given enough time and care to understand them, and that understanding creates safety, the feeling that someone truly sees us and truly cares for us. Safety is the foundation for care to grow. When people feel safe, they dare to reveal their vulnerable parts, their fears, their wounds, their pain. If every time they speak they are dismissed, judged, or pushed aside, they will slowly withdraw. And when a person withdraws, care has little ground to touch. That is why caring is not only giving, it is also creating a safe space where someone can be themselves. On the other hand, we also need to learn to allow ourselves to be cared for. Many people are excellent at giving, but terrible at receiving. They are used to carrying everything alone, enduring everything alone, solving everything alone. When someone wants to share, they refuse, fearing they will bother others or become a burden. But repeated refusal is also a way of closing the door. When we do not allow others the chance to care for us, the relationship loses balance. Care needs to circulate both ways, even if it is not always equal. Allowing ourselves to be cared for is not weakness, it is trust. Trust that the other has goodwill. Trust that we deserve attention. Trust that closeness does not necessarily lead to harm. When we open the heart just enough, care becomes alive instead of one-sided. Seen more broadly, the way we care often reflects the way we were cared for. Those raised without being listened to often struggle to listen. Those who are abandoned easily fear abandonment and cling. Those who had to fend for themselves early on grow used to relying on no one. Recognizing this is not to blame the past, but to understand that each person carries their own wounds into relationships. Therefore, true care requires patience, patience with others' limits and with our own. No one changes overnight. No one learns to care well after only a few realizations. But each time we pause, observe, and adjust, we take one more step.
Care grows not through dramatic determination, but through small and steady changes. In the simplest words, care is the ability not to turn away from suffering, not turning away from another's suffering, and not turning away from our own. When we